So I really like the movie. Probably one of my favorite movies of all time is Remember the Titans. Remember the Titans. It is a movie that is set in the tumultuous period of race. You know, it happens where they segregate this small school, or not segregate, but they integrate. They combine both black students and white students. And this football team faces some pretty hard tasks, and that is just simply learning to practice together. And there's a scene in the movie where this white athlete and this black athlete kind of bump into one another. And they've been having two-a-days for the last week. And two-a-days, for those who don't know, it means that you practice in the morning and then you practice in the evening. You practice twice a day. And it's a very grueling time for any athlete to go through that. And so the football players, they bump into one another. And the coach, the head coach, Coach Boone, had tasked everybody to learn certain information about your roommate. And they were all partnered with people that they didn't like. And so finally the white athlete says, man, let's get some things straight. I am tired of having these two-a-days. And they start to have this conversation. And basically the white athlete is telling the black athlete that he's selfish in his play, that he's a great athlete, but he's a God-given waste of talent. Because he doesn't watch out for anybody but himself. And he says, that's right. I'm going to watch out for myself because I don't want to get beat up by my own teammates, basically. And then he asks the white player, he says, are you the leader? Are you the captain? The guy says, yeah, I'm the captain. I'm the leader. He says, are you doing your job? He says, yeah, I'm doing my job. And he says, why don't you tell your white buddies to block for Rev, the black quarterback, because we both know they're not doing a very good job. And then that's when Reese says, you know what? Until that happens, I'm going to play for myself, and I'm going to watch out for my own self. And the captain of the team says, man, that is the worst attitude anybody could have. And he says, attitude reflects leadership. Attitude reflects leadership. And that's kind of the story where we're at, is whenever you have a good leader who is doing things right, that trickles down to everyone else. Because the leader sets an example, whether it's on the football field or in the family or a nation. And what's really bad is whenever the leader sins or whenever they mess up, something happens to where it sets this precedent or this example for everybody else to say, well, if the leader is doing it, then so can I. And what happens is an entire nation, even, as we'll see from today's sermon, an entire nation suffers the consequences of a leader's sins. See, that's what happened with Solomon. Solomon was the leader. But because of his sin, the entire nation was split into two. So let's look at the divided kingdom. It's a kingdom torn in two. 1 Kings 12 through 16. I encourage you throughout the week to read these few chapters to kind of get the rest of the story. We're going to look at the divided kingdom because it's important for us to have some basic understanding of this period. Because then, whenever you go and you read the prophets especially, it'll be talking about how certain individuals prophesying against Israel or prophesying against Judah. And to understand where those kingdoms are and what they're made up of, it helps you to better understand the intent of the prophet. And so God prophesied that the division would occur. And so he caused the division. I wanted to turn your attention to 1 Kings 11, 29 through 39. We're going to go backwards just a moment to kind of set it up a little bit better. It says, about that time, Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, and Ahijah, the prophet of Shiloh, met him on the way, wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone out in the country, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Stop right there. It would have been really hard for me to be a prophet of God in the Old Testament because I'm too cheap to take a new cloak and tear it up into several pieces. But anyway, the prophets of God, especially as we'll look at next week's sermon, prophets had to do some crazy things. I mean, you think tearing up a new cloak is crazy. You just wait. So, back into it. And then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have 1 tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in my ways, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my statutes and laws as David, Solomon's father, did. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him ruler all the days of his life, for the sake of David my servant, whom I chose and who observed my commands and statutes. I will take the kingdom from his son's hands and give you 10 tribes. I will give 1 tribe to his son, so that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I chose to put my name. However, as for you, I will take you and you will rule over all your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. If you do whatever I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and commands, as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David and will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever." And so what is God doing with dividing the kingdom? What is his purpose or his goal? Well, his goal is to humble David's descendants, to bring them to the point of recognition of their sins and to come back into the true service of the one true God. And so we understand from these verses that Solomon's sin, his spiritual adultery, led not only him away from God, but led the entire nation away from God. His example of worshiping Ashtoreth and other false gods led the entire nation into doing those very practices. As Solomon sought to learn more about certain gods or goddesses, he just kind of that teaching spread throughout the kingdom. And so other people are worshiping those gods and goddesses. He's putting up places for him to go and for his wives to go and worship these false gods. And so also these people who are just following the king's example are going and worshiping all of these other gods. You see, all in all, Solomon turning away from Yahweh caused much of the kingdom to turn away as well. And if it didn't cause everyone to turn away, it set the people up to be easily led astray. This just goes to show the damage of and the effects of a leader's sin. You see, a leader's sin creates a trickle effect. It goes down. Whenever they sin, it sets up the attitude of people to say, well, if they can do it, so can I. What's the problem with me doing it if they can just do it? So not only does it set an example or precedent to do wrong, but it also causes those under the leader to suffer the consequences. Whenever David sinned, who suffered? His family. Whenever Solomon sinned, who suffered? The kingdom. And so this division was going to be a temporary undertaking. Ahijah the prophet told Jeroboam, hey, you're going to rule over all Israel as long as you do what God says. As long as you walk in the way of David, you're going to have a kingdom like David's kingdom. Your son and his son and his son, you're going to have a dynasty ruling over Israel until David's descendants are humbled. But we have to understand this humbling process was not going to go on forever. Eventually, God's ultimate plan would be accomplished. And this ultimate plan not only involved the unity of a single nation, it involved the unity of an entire world to him. This plan was going to go through the Messiah, and we'll return to this at the end of the sermon. But for now, understand that God caused Israel to be divided with the help of Solomon's son, Rehoboam. So as we look at things from God's perspective, we'll call this the upper story. Whenever we look at this from the upper story, we understand that God orchestrated all of these events in order to bring about what he wanted or what he had prophesied, all because of Solomon's disobedience. I mean, think about it. Out of all of Solomon's sons, and he had 300 wives, so I bet you he had a lot of sons. And so out of all of his sons, who comes to the throne? Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the man for the job. He was the one that God needed to be there. I'll show you why in a moment. So that's from the upper story. We recognize that God created and orchestrated these events. But then from the lower story, from our perspective, it appears that it was the actions of man that led to this situation. And in fact, it was. There were certain factors that led to this split. First off, Solomon's work programs caused people to feel oppressed. At Shechem, where Rehoboam was to be anointed as king, groups of Israelites had gathered, and they made this request. They said, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. They're feeling the pressure of a hard king. They just, it's a changing of the guard. They're thinking, we can have some of this taken off of us. And so what does Rehoboam do? Well, he does what a good king should do. He says, give me some time to think about this. He says, come back in 3 days and I'll have you an answer. And so he goes away and he seeks counsel. He first turns to the elders and they say, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. Okay, well, thanks for that. And then Rehoboam turns to his friends. And they tell him, this is what you need to say. Say, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Oh, the choices. I mean, we're looking at this and we think, well, the obvious choice is number one. That's the best advice, right? And so, 3 days later, Rehoboam goes to meet with the people and he says, greetings, my loyal subjects. I believe I found an answer to your request. And I do believe it is the best answer. Let me tell you, I would agree with you that my father was a little bit harsh. That, he put you into forced labor. So here's what I'm going to do to you. I'm going to make that even heavier. I mean, you think my dad was bad. You just wait. He whipped you with scorpions. He whipped you with whips. I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. You haven't seen harsh labor, people. So then we read, since the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah the Shilonite. You see, God knew what was in Rehoboam's heart. He knew the attitude that Rehoboam was going to bring to the table. And so God brings Rehoboam to put him in place. And so for that time and period, so that God would use Rehoboam's attitude to bring about the division of the kingdom, to fulfill the prophecy that God had given to Solomon. And so once Rehoboam rejected the requests of his people, they all went away and said, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel, look after your own home. And shortly thereafter, they take Jeroboam and they make him king. And then we have the nation of Israel divided into two kingdoms. Israel. It's your first fill in the blank if you're going along. Israel was the very first kingdom. It was not the first, rather, but it was located in the north. It had a combination of 10 tribes, just as Ahijah had given to Jeroboam 10 sections of his cloak. So Israel was made up of 10 tribes. The capital of Israel was Samaria. And if you're familiar with the New Testament, you're familiar with Samaria and how the Jews, instead of walking through Samaria to save 50 miles, they would walk around just to avoid the place. This is kind of where it all started at. There were 9 dynasties with 19 different kings. You see, due to the social disorder and the religious dysfunction, they were unable to sustain a line of succession from father to son. See, whenever somebody had come along in power and, oh, we don't like this guy, let's all rebel against him, kill him, take him out of the way, kill his whole family, and put somebody else in place. That is the turmoil that Israel dealt with. Now, for the most part, all of the kings were bad, which is representative of the little frowny face in your notes. So most of them were bad, but the rest of them were very bad. They were evil. In fact, it started off from the very beginning. They started off on the wrong foot. Jeroboam, the first king, he got to thinking, wait a second. What happens whenever my people go and worship the festivals that they're supposed to worship? What happens when they go to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices? Oh my goodness, if they do that, they might stay there. Oh, what to do? Oh, here's a great idea. Let's just build our own idols, guys. Let's just build our own gods. And so what does Jeroboam do? He fashions 2 golden calves. And he places them in the capital. And he says, behold, these are your gods, O Israel, who delivered you and who have saved you. Sacrifice to them. And so because of that, he not only prevented the tribes from going down to Jerusalem to worship Yahweh, but he also prevented them from worshiping Yahweh there. He led them astray. And afterwards, anytime a king would be evil, he would be compared and said that he walked in all the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and in his sin, which caused all Israel to commit. Again, the sins of a leader influences the sins of a nation. And so the kings and the kingdom of Israel dealt with conflict, which all stemmed from sin and a non-existent relationship with God. And eventually, the entire kingdom was taken away. They were judged and punished by God. He sent the Assyrians, a very cruel and wicked people, in 722 BC. And so at that point, the kingdom of Israel was no more. Now, the other portion of the kingdom was called Judah. Judah was located in the south. It was a combination of 2 tribes which formed one, because maybe that was a little bit confusing because Ahijah had said, he'd taken 2 pieces of his cloak and said these are for Solomon's son, but then he says that Solomon's son is going to have 1 tribe. So what in the world? Well, what happened was Benjamin became or was integrated into the tribe of Judah, forming 1 tribe. They kept the city of Jerusalem as their capital. It was already there, and so they just kept it. Judah had 1 dynasty and 19 different kings, meaning that every single king descended from David. And Jesus descended through that line also. For the most part, the kings were good. But some of the kings were really, really good. I mean, 2 of the best kings were Hezekiah and Josiah. Under their individual reigns, revival swept across Judah. But squeezed in between them was an individual named Manasseh. Manasseh was a very, very bad king. Very bad. In fact, the Bible talks about because of what he did, God finally said, that's it, there's no more. I'm going to send the Babylonians, and they are going to punish you, and I'm going to judge you through them. And in fact, that's exactly what God did in 586 BC, that he eventually said, that's it, there's no more, it's time to pay the piper. And so Judah was judged and punished. But like any good parent who is going to discipline their children, they don't just all of a sudden, there's some warning. There's, hey, if you don't stop that, you're going to get it. So that's what God did with Israel and with Judah. He gave them warning after warning. You need to stop. You need to listen to me. He sent prophets, and they were messengers to herald the impending judgment if there was no repentance. And we'll look at that next week. But for now, let's just look at one more thing. The most important thing of the whole sermon. You see, this final thing, if dividing the nation of Israel was as temporary as creating the nation of Israel, what is God trying to accomplish? I mean, you look at it and maybe you think, man, God's uniting and dividing. He's criticizing and complaining. He's acting like some girl or something. Drama, drama, drama. He's God. Why doesn't he just take charge? Well, God has taken charge. You see, that's the whole point of the story. That God has taken charge. You see, dividing the kingdom of Israel and creating a divided kingdom in Israel, that's all been part of God's plan. You see, because from the beginning, God has desired to coexist with his creation in perfect harmony, not simply rule over them in holy fear. And so you see, the goal was not necessarily Israel as a nation. The goal was not necessarily dividing up the one into two. You see, God's intended purpose was not a government. God's intended purpose was a companionship. You see, in the beginning, that's what we see. We don't see a nation. We see God and his creation coexisting in a holy and awesome and perfect union. That's the goal. But yet, because of Adam's sin, what happens? That existence, that union is broken because of sin. And so from the time of Adam's sin to the choosing of Saul as a king, the people of God lived in a theocracy. They lived in a theocracy. A theocracy is a state governed by God. He was in charge. And you can really see this once Israel is made a nation and is called out of Egypt. And what does God do? God gives them laws to govern them. He gives them Levitical priesthood so they can know his will. And then he gives them the tabernacle so that he can live with them. But yet the people wanted a king. And so after Saul was placed on the throne, up until the final king of Judah, the people of God lived in a monarchy. A monarchy where there was a king ruling over them. Again, this isn't what God wanted because he was their king. But nevertheless, he gave them a king in order to show them the error of their thinking and to bring them to repentance. But again, the divided nation of Israel was as temporary as the united nation of Israel because God had a greater plan. This greater plan involved unity. Again, not just unity with one nation, but a unity with all the world. You see, this was Jesus' mission. This is the ultimate conclusion of God's plan. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that he sent his world into the Son, not to condemn the world," as 3:17 says, "but to save the world through him." You see, Jesus came from the tribe of Judah, straight from the lineage of David. This is why it appears that Judah had special privileges. But you see, God preserved the kingdom of Judah, because if that kingdom would have fallen in complete apostasy as Israel had, then we would have no tribe for Jesus to come out of. And so even though Jesus was a descendant of David, he did not come to this earth to sit on a physical throne. You see, whenever Jesus came the first time, he didn't come to set up a theocratic monarchy where God would rule through him. No, Jesus did not come to unite the 12 tribes of Israel back together. No, you see, Jesus came for a much greater purpose. He came to restore unity between the Creator and the creation. This has been the ultimate plan of God from the very beginning. The only way that Jesus could restore unity is if he were to die. He didn't come to be a king. He came to be a sacrifice. Matthew 20:28 says, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So here's what you need to understand. Whenever we read the words, "I will humble David's descendants, but not forever," we have to understand that that is pointing to the time of Jesus. It's pointing to the time whenever Jesus is going to step on the scene. You see, that's the big lesson of the united kingdom and the divided kingdom. The big lesson is John 14:6, which says that Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." You see, that's the big point. That's the big picture. That's what God's perspective has seen since the beginning. You see, before Adam and Eve sinned, God is focused on the day of Jesus. When Abraham was given the promise from God that God is going to bless the entire world through him, God is focused on the day of Jesus. Whenever the kingdom of Israel is divided up in order to humble David's descendants, God is focused on the day of Jesus. And you know something? God is still focused on the day of Jesus. And so should we. Peter writes in his second letter, "But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives as you look forward to the day of God and speed its coming." Did you catch it? What kind of people ought we to be? We ought to be the kind that live holy and godly lives as we look forward to the day of God and speed its coming. Are you looking forward to the day of Jesus? Because we should be. And if you're not looking forward to the day of Jesus, maybe it's because of disunity in your life. You see, the only reason that we have to look forward to Jesus returning is because we have unity with God through his sacrifice. And if we don't have unity, then for Jesus to come back is a terrible and dreadful thing to think about, because with him is going to bring a sword, is going to bring judgment. You see, if your leader is not Jesus, you have no unity with God. If your leader is your spouse, if your leader is your children, the president, if you are even living life based on how you want to live life, you have no unity with the Father. You see, only Jesus can give us unity, because he is the way, the truth, and the life. I invite you to think about where you stand in relation to having unity with God as we sing the song of invitation. Turn your eyes upon Jesus.